now it wasn't just the large one. Been out in the woods and come upon a stairway in the middle of the woods. It doesn't lead anywhere. And I can't imagine that kind of an encounter face to face. Well, my name is Jim Myers, and I own the Sasquatch Outpost in Bailey, Colorado, which is a gift shop and a museum, both. And how I got started in this, well, that's a little bit of a longer story, but I have always been interested in Sasquatch ever since I was a child, going back to the Legend of Boggy Creek movie when I was 10, and that came out. And I went to see it with my younger brother, and I can't even remember who took us. We were too young to go by ourselves, but it fascinated me. It scared me to death. It also fascinated me. And, they never called it Bigfoot or Sasquatch. At the time, those terms I don't think were much in use yet. So they just called it the Boggy Creek Monster, but it was a Sasquatch. And it was a true story from Fouke, Arkansas. So fast forward many, many years. I spent many years overseas, about 28 years overseas. And until I moved back to the States in 2009, there wasn't a whole lot I could do to pursue the interest I had in Sasquatch. So when we moved back in 2009 to Colorado, I was able to start pursuing that interest more through research on the internet. And then we opened our store in 2013, but it took us about 9 months to get it open. So all of 2012, pretty much, we were working to get it open, because the building that houses our facility was built in 1878, and it was terrible shape. Should have been probably condemned. So it took us a long time, and we finally got open in 2013. But in 2012, we were going to just start a grocery store. We weren't planning to do a Sasquatch anything. And so we were working to open this grocery store, mercantile kind of thing. But two things happened during those months of 2012 while we were working on the store. One was I met my first Bigfoot eyewitness, a gal who ran a local business and had seen it. So she had seen it in May of 12, I think, and with her best friend, 2-person daytime sighting. And so I got together with her and heard her story, and she had complete credibility in my perspective. And then not long after that, a couple of months after I heard her story, the show Finding Bigfoot came to Bailey and did an episode, a Colorado episode. And I went to that filming and met the cast. And so as a result of all that, and I saw how many people were at that meeting and saw how many people stood up to tell a story about a Sasquatch encounter in this area. And now that I know the area, I understand why there were so many people there. I decided that we would open this store as the Bailey Country Store and Sasquatch Outpost, and took us about a year and a half, and we canned the country store part of it and just kept the Sasquatch Outpost, because that's the only thing people were interested in was Sasquatch. They weren't interested in groceries. So we took a big risk and made the switch to Bigfoot, and we've never looked back. It's grown every year since we've been in business, 10 years now.
Well, so what all do you carry there? Is it mostly just souvenir type things or books or combination?
Everything. I mean, the store is built. We built the store we had some other people renting space from us initially. And once they moved out, then I converted the entire space into the Sasquatch outpost. So I brought in 27 trees. And so it looks like a forest. About half the store looks like a forest, and to keep the theme. And so we sell anything and everything you can imagine that has Sasquatch. Um, T-shirts, mugs, stickers. I mean, you name it, we sell it. And but I try to make a very clear distinction between the store, which is we have a lot of fun. We poke fun at ourselves and Bigfoot in the store, in the things we sell and the T-shirts we sell. But once you step into the Sasquatch Encounter Discovery Museum, it's completely serious, and I want people to take it seriously and to see it as an educational um, adventure when they go in there. And so I'm not joking at all in the museum. I'm very serious about what I'm showing them and the displays and everything. And I think people realize that once they go in to the museum. It's funny. A lot of people will come into the store, the gift shop only, and then they'll write a review on TripAdvisor or something, Google, and they'll say, yeah, wasn't much of a museum. It looked more like a store. Well, that's because they never went in the museum, because our store looks so much like an a destination that people think they've been in the museum by just coming in the store, and they never actually went into the museum. So I think that's funny. I think that's a testimony to how cool our store looks, that people think they've been in the museum and they haven't.
That is interesting. Let's go back to 2012 when you're working on this store and a local person, you meet her and she is an actual eyewitness. Can you tell me what she shared with you that caught your attention so much?
She and her best friend had been visiting. She was a business owner, actually managed a lodge here in Bailey, and she and her best friend, it was May, it was dusk, but it was still daylight, and they went out for a walk, and her best friend was going to leave the next day. So two people, daytime, and as they were walking, they were behind the lodge. They were on somebody else's property. They didn't know it at the time, but they were probably a quarter of a mile back from behind their lodge. And so they were just walking and talking, and they were going up this little Forest Service road and talking. When they in hindsight, they said that they remembered finding it strange that pine cones kept falling around them. That was the Sasquatch that was throwing them at them. But at the time, they didn't put two and two together. It was only later. And so they had these pine cones landing around them. And then they were hiking up this road. They heard a loud crack up ahead of them and to their left. And they looked up, and a Sasquatch came running down the hill to their left, maybe 200 feet away, close enough to see it, obviously. And it ran down the hill, didn't look at them. It was bent over, swinging its arms, and it ran into the trees and disappeared. And when I went to that site with her later, probably a month after it happened, you could still see where the pine straw had been kicked up by this Sasquatch running down this hill. And it was about a 6-foot stride, but the hill was so steep that as I tried to run down it, I had to, brake myself. That thing she said it just ran full speed down the hill. And so they stood there for a minute in silence after it ran by, and then looked at each other. And one of them said, "Was that a deer?" She said, "I knew it wasn't a deer, but I didn't know what to say." And the other one said, "No, that was a Bigfoot." And So they talked, they agreed that they would not tell anyone because they didn't want to seem like they were nuts. And they started heading back to the lodge, and a car came by, and it was somebody they knew. And the first thing they talked about was, "You won't believe what we just saw." So their pact didn't last very long, and then she was on the show Finding Bigfoot, giving her story, and they did a special recreation of her story as well. So they believed her. I believed her. Um, and she's never changed her story in all these years.
Well, I'm sure that owning the museum, you have people that come through there that have had encounters or experiences. Can you share any of the more interesting ones with me?
Oh, we've had hundreds. I think we have a map back in the museum where people um, who have had an encounter and tell us about it. I will take them back into the museum, and we have the museum. The map has a plexiglass cover on it because kids messed around with the pins too much. But I think the last count, and we have pins that indicate by color if it was a Class A sighting, if somebody found footprints, heard a vocalization, had something thrown at them, and the last I think is tree structures that people found. So there's multiple colors. I think all told, we have about between 350 and 400 pins on the map now, and but they have to tell us their story before they can't just go back there and put a pin on the map. So I've heard all the stories. There's lots. I mean, I would say probably one of the memorable ones was um, two guys and one of their sons were fishing um, north of here. I'm in Bailey. What state are you in?
I'm in Missouri.
Missouri. Okay. So Bailey's a little mountain town in the foothills of the Rockies, and they were fishing at a lake a couple hours north of us, and they had been fishing all night. That was their plan, I guess. And so early in the morning, about right after dawn, just when it was, you know, light enough to see, um, the boy was asleep. The two guys were fishing, and across this little inlet from where they were, uh, steps out two adult Sasquatch, and just from the position where they were fishing and where the Sasquatch came out, stepping out from the willows, the Sasquatch couldn't initially see where they were, but they could see them. So they came out, they looked around, they made a noise, and two juveniles came running out and just started playing in the water with these two adults kind of watching them. And these guys said that they were very large, all one color, reddish brown, and their eyes were dark. You couldn't see any white in their eyes. And so this probably went on for a few minutes. They tried to wake up the kid so he could see it. And I think the act of waking him up alerted the Sasquatch, and they turned and looked at them and then made a noise again. And the two young ones scampered back in, and they left once they realized they were being observed. So that's a story I remember. Probably the most memorable story of all of them was a guy who had some land near Cripple Creek, Colorado. He's a Vietnam vet, and he had 20, 30 acres, and he went on the property one day with his wife and his, I think, brother-in-law, and they were hiking around, and they kind of split up, and his wife and his brother-in-law went off one direction, and he went a different way. And there's a big rock outcropping. I've been to the site. There's a big rock outcropping in the middle of this property, and from when you're up on the outcrop, you can look way down to the bottom of his property, maybe a half mile down. So he was up there and he looked down at the bottom and he could see what he thought was a bear bent over, but it stood up. He realized it wasn't a bear and that it was a Sasquatch. And so he turned and he yelled behind him to get his wife and his brother-in-law to come so they could see this. And then he turned back, and now it wasn't just the large one, there was a little one with it, and they were moving away from him and into the trees. And he turned and he yelled again, couldn't figure out where his wife and brother-in-law were, and turned back again. And now the first two were gone. It was obviously a female and a young one, and there was a big male that had seen him, obviously heard him yelling, and so it was heading up the hill fast towards him. So where he was standing, he was kind of on some rocks above the ground, actual ground level. And this thing came, booking it up this hill, and he knew he couldn't get away. There was no way he could get away. So he thinks, okay, I'm dead. This thing's going to kill me. And so he just sat down on the rock that he was standing on, kind of waiting for the inevitable. And this Sasquatch comes up the hill, comes right up to him. So the Sasquatch is on the ground. He's above on the rock, but they're eye to eye because of the height of the Sasquatch. And he determined that later on, when he measured, that it was about 9 feet tall. It walked right up and stood 3 to 4 feet away from him, looking him in the eyes. And, he was just sitting there with his hands, he didn't want to move his hands. He didn't want to do anything that would come across as threatening. He knew what it was. And so they just looked at each other. And so when he realized after 30 seconds or so, this thing wasn't going to kill him, it was just standing there, he kind of relaxed a little bit. And so they just stared at each other for about 7 or 8 minutes. And he got a really good look at his face, and his head. And at one point, he wanted to look down to see the rest of his body. So he kind of leaned forward, and he said the Sasquatch kind of leaned back and gave him a strange look, like, what are you doing? But he said it had dark eyes. Again, you couldn't see any white in the sclera, very dark eyes. The Sasquatch never opened its mouth, but they looked at each other, looking in the eyes. And he said that he had an extremely intelligent look about him. It was clearly a male. And so after this went on for a few minutes, I can't imagine that kind of an encounter face to face, literally. The Sasquatch started to leave, and there were some big trees next to where the Sasquatch was standing. And so it picked up, and he said the skin was kind of grayish color, and he was covered in hair, but not his whole face, just around his face. And there was no hair on the palms of his hands. And so he reached and grabbed a branch and started to step under it. And then he stopped and he put the branch down, and he came back over to Jim. His name was Jim as well. And the Sasquatch leaned right in to the point where he could smell his breath. And he said his breath smelled like cows that had just been eating fresh grass. It wasn't a bad smell. And he said the Sasquatch just leaned in and looked at him, and kind of with an expression like, what are you? And then stepped back and picked up the branch and stepped under the branch, and walked into the trees. So at that point, he turns and he yells, and then his wife and his brother-in-law come to where he is, and he's just ecstatic, excited, scared to death. And he says, quick, if we run around over here we can see it. And there was a Sasquatch, and his wife knew him well enough to know that his demeanor was, he wasn't lying, he was telling the truth. And she said, I don't want to go over there. She said, I want to leave, let's leave. And she wouldn't have any of it. She didn't want to see this thing at all. So he had to leave. But yeah, I think I've heard Jim tell that story probably 4 times now. He's never changed one detail of the story. And these, him recounting this was separated by years in a couple of cases, but yeah, he's never changed the story at all. And so I know he's telling the truth, because when people lie about something like that, they change little details. And he doesn't do that. He tells the exact same story.
So has he ever had another encounter? Was that an
That was
isolated
the
event?
only one he's ever had, and it was a
What about the
doozy.
what about the lady, the eyewitness lady? Has she
She
seen
has
this?
not either. Um, it's, unless you're doing research like me or other researchers, uh, most people have one encounter, 1 or 2 encounters, because they're not out there looking for them all the time, and we are. And so it doesn't surprise me when someone's had multiple encounters. That's a surprise, and it's usually because there's just some people, I don't know why this is, there's just some people who um, tend to be a magnet for Sasquatch. I don't know how else to explain it. They see them all the time when they're hiking, camping, hunting, whatever the case. But that's not normal. Not most people who I've talked to, and I've talked to hundreds, see it one time maybe in their life, and for most of them, that's enough. They're not interested in seeing another one. The encounters often scare them, even though the Sasquatch almost never shows any aggression towards them. But I mean, you can imagine the experience of seeing something 8 or 9 feet tall. You, like Jim, you would assume that's going to kill you. And so it's the fear that you're going to die that creates PTSD in many people's situations. And even though nothing happened, but it's the fear that something was going to happen that was enough.
So you get out and boots on the ground, do your own research.
Yep, always have.
And so tell me about that. What's your approach? What have you seen? What have you experienced out there?
Well, a lot of it's just time clocked in the woods. I've done, who knows how many nights camping, hiking at night, taking customers hiking at night, taking customers camping. But personally, the most of my own personal research has been with a couple of different guys doing gifting. And so we pick a spot that's not far. I mean, none of the gifting sites that we've ever had were more than 15 minutes from my house. So you don't have to go into the middle of wilderness areas to find a Sasquatch. They're here. They're on our doorstep, literally. And so, and I knew if I picked a spot that was a long way off, I would never go there. I mean, it had to be a place that was convenient for me to go to and for my research partners to go to. And so we would pick a place in the woods that no one knew about but us, and that was not on a trail. It had to be off a trail so that there would be no accidental way somebody would find our gifting site. And so it's usually our most successful site was right on the side of the mountain, literally, I mean, steep as that. And there's no reason for anybody to hike up there. I mean, there's nothing to look at up there. And so we found a big flat rock partway up the maybe 200 yards, 300 yards up the side of the mountain off the trail. And we would take things and we tried lots of different things. We tried different colored rocks. We tried play like plastic animals. Um, Interestingly, they anytime we put toy horses out there, they would be taken. Anytime we put other animals, I don't think they were ever taken. And if we put a toy like a plastic dog, they would throw it on the ground next to the rock. They didn't like the dogs at all. And the other animals, they would just kind of mess with them, but leave them there on the rock. But they would interact with us virtually every time we would go out there. We would take pictures as we arrived so that we knew how we found things. We would take some things away, put some different things, take more pictures or videos. So we always had a record of what it was like when we got there, how we changed it, then the next time how it was changed again. And they were very, very active. They almost every time we would change something, they would then interact with it. But they would do things like, I mean, the thing they took the most that we ever put out there were the sharp ends of deer antlers, so the deer tines, antler tines, and they took maybe 100 of those over the course of a couple of years. And so don't know what they did with them. We never saw them again after they took them, but a couple times they would take, once they took a plastic horse that was standing, and then we had a little wooden bust of a horse that you just kind of set on the base. That was maybe, the bust was maybe 4 inches high, and the plastic horse maybe 3. And they took them, and like 2 years later, we found them back, not exactly on the site, but just down a little hill from where we have our gifting site. They were there, and it was clear that they had been placed there because the plastic horse was in a hollowed out log, so there was no way it was going to get there other than being put there. And it was completely clean, just the way it looked when we put it out 2 years before. And the bust was also there, but because it was wood, it had started to mold a little bit, got some, not mold, but moss. So yeah, they would leave us, occasionally they would leave us something. Like one time we put a little Playmobil cow, a little plastic cow that had an articulating neck, but the rest of the body just couldn't move. And so we came back and we found a blue jay feather stuck right in the articulation of the neck, sticking up with the feather part up. And we never put that there. They put that there. Little things like that. They never left us any big significant gifts, but they would interact with us enough that we knew they'd been there. Sometimes we thought they hadn't been there, and we would take our before picture and our after picture, and we realized that they had rotated everything 90 degrees from where we had left it. Raccoons don't do that. Squirrels don't do that. That's intelligent interaction with us. And so, but yeah, it's been fascinating. But a lot of the interactions I've had have just been when I'm out hiking or camping, and I've learned over the years kind of what their behavior tends to be when we're out there and when they're near us. And all the years I've been doing this, I've never, maybe one exception, I've never felt that they were showing any aggression towards me. And the one exception was hiking out of an area we'd been in, and it was about 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. And they threw a rock behind. So there are 3 of us. I was first, and then a second and a third person. The guy at the back, he said that this rock hit this tree so hard, I thought he had reached up and grabbed a dead branch and snapped it off. It was that loud. And, but he said, no, something had hit a tree behind him, maybe 10 feet behind him. And I've never been hit by anything. They've thrown things near me, past me, around me, but they've never hit me. And I've heard of maybe one or two people who've actually been struck by an object. I just don't think that's their intention. I don't think that's what they're after, is to show aggression towards us. And the few stories that I've heard where people talk about being attacked by Sasquatch, to be honest, I question whether that's a true story, because the vast majority of guys and gals I know who are doing what I'm doing, none of us have ever been hurt. And they could kill us in a heartbeat. I mean, they're so much more powerful than we are. That's just not what they do. So.
Have you heard anything? Have you heard any vocals at all from them?
Yeah, we've heard lots of vocals, whoops, lots of tree knocks. We've heard call. I've done a call, and then I get a call back similar, but not exactly like mine. And I've had that happen 3 times in a row, and then they just shut up after that. They don't make any other noise. So kind of a yell. I'll yell, and they'll do something back, kind of like what I did, but not a lot of vocals. I mean, maybe it's the Sasquatch here, but they tend to be pretty quiet. I mean, they make physical noise, breaking branches and snapping twigs and stuff. And I know it's not a bear or a lion or something, because predators in the wild, so in Colorado, that would be bears and lions primarily, their success at capturing their prey depends on them being quiet, and their success of not being caught depends on them being quiet. So both predators and prey are both extremely quiet in the woods. So when I hear branches just, crack, 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 I know it's not anything other than the Sasquatch, because nothing else makes noise like that intentionally so that you'll hear it. And so, we've had them make those kind of noises both sides of the trail at night. As we're hiking up, they'll be making cracking noises, and I know we're being shadowed, but they never show themselves in those situations. And rarely will they vocalize, but they will let us know that they're around by these other noises that they make, throwing things, breaking things. And again, there's nothing else in nature that really does that intentionally, as opposed to being quiet and trying to survive. So
when they threw the rocks near you, or not at you so much as close by you, what do you think their intent was with that?
Most of the time, and they throw green pine cones as well, because they're easier to, they travel farther than a ripe opened pine cone. Most of the time, my guess is they're just messing with us, and that makes sense to me, because they're as intelligent as we are. And so, if I'm out in the woods for an extended period of time and I want to get somebody's attention, I think they're just messing with us. I mean, again, if they wanted to hurt us, I would have been struck multiple times. And they throw them so hard, rocks in particular. If it hit me in the head, it would kill me. I mean, I'm convinced of that. But I mean, my research partner has been walking on the trail by himself on one occasion, and he heard a pine cone drop from a tree, maybe 3 or 4 deep off the trail. It wasn't right next to the trail. And squirrels during the summer are constantly breaking off little pine cones and dropping them and then storing them. So he's assuming it's a squirrel. So he looks up to see where the squirrel is, and he sees another pine cone come over his head and hit the same tree and drop. And he looks behind him, and there's nothing there. And he sees two more over his head. I mean, he's looking back. There's nothing there throwing them. And these pine cones didn't hit any other tree coming through a thick forest, didn't hit any other tree, hit the same tree 4 times in a row and dropped. And so that's how accurate their aim is. So they hit what they're aiming at, and it's not us. So I just think they're messing with us. I think most of the time they're saying, hey, I'm here. I know you're here. The hard rock throwing where it's really loud, that may be telling us, okay, it's time to move on. Go ahead and get back to your vehicle and take off because, you're trespassing on our territory. And so I think the harder, more aggressive throws are telling us that it's time to go. And I usually listen to that. I don't have a real compelling reason to not leave at that point. And so I always have. Now I've probably been in the woods for hours by then. So I'm tired and I'm ready to go anyway. But I've never intentionally kept staying to see, okay, how much more aggressive are you going to get if I don't leave? So I usually get one hard whack from a rock and I tell them goodbye and I take off.
So have you ever found footprints?
We have, mostly in the snow, because the ground in Colorado is not like Missouri. You've got lots of mud depending on the time of year. Even when it rains here, the ground is really hard because it's mostly made, in the mountains anyway, it's mostly made of decomposed granite. And it's just almost impossible to leave a track in that base material. And so snow is where we catch them. I mean, occasionally next to a stream or something where there's mud, but that's hard as well because there's plenty of places they can go drink from that same stream without ever leaving a track. And I think they would prefer not to leave a track most of the time. And so, because they don't just want to announce their presence. So, but in the snow, fresh snow, in fact, I'm going out this weekend probably because we've had some snow recently. And we just go driving and we just look for tracks on either side of the road. I don't go, bushwhacking after a snowstorm a mile because it's just hard to get around. And I've got a bad knee and I don't want to hurt it worse. So, and in the past, we've found tracks crossing the road. So, and they were Sasquatch tracks. But you have to have, the challenge with snow tracks is you have to have a special forensic spray that you spray kind of into the track and you leave it till it dries and spray another layer. And it's easy to put down 5 or 6 layers of this spray because eventually what happens is the spray forms a shell inside that track. So then you can pour your plaster or your hydrocal or whatever you're using. But even just pure plaster of Paris, when you mix that with water, there's enough of a chemical reaction that heats it up just a little bit, but it's enough to melt a track. If you pour it into a untreated snow track, that track will melt and everything will flow away. So it's amazing that chemical, just plaster and water, the heat that can generate, that's enough to melt snow. And so if I don't have the right materials or the right spray, I just take pictures of tracks and I leave them. I don't try to cast them because I figure the next time I go out, if I remember, I'll try and take stuff with me. But all that stuff weighs a lot on your back. I mean, plaster is not light, and you have to take a bunch of it. in case you see more than one track. So you're carrying all this stuff around on your back hiking, and it's kind of miserable to do that.
Sir, how about structures? What kind of structures have you found?
We found tons. The most common are common to what I see elsewhere, with trees being broken generally about halfway up, mostly aspen trees. A few times I'll find fir trees, even big fir trees like this um, that have been broken. Sometimes it's natural, sometimes it could be a storm that breaks it, but the U.S. Forest Service has done studies on how often in a big storm a tree will go down from the roots as opposed to snapping, part way up the trunk. Their root systems are just too shallow, and it's almost, trees do go down by snapping, but the force that it takes to snap a tree is exponentially greater than for that tree just to go down because the roots give way, because their root system is pretty shallow. Aspens is shallow. Most of the pine species are shallow. So the structures I find are trees or saplings that are broken about halfway up and kind of twisted. So they're not just broken, they're broken and twisted a couple times so that the whole thing has this knotted look about it. I've found lots of trees that were bent from the roots, and this can be 15 feet up, but they'll bend it into an arch, and then they'll jam the top end into the ground or under a big rock or under a tree trunk so that the arch shape stays that way. And there's trees I know now that are there that have been like that for years, and they never, that top end never comes back out of the ground. And so trees don't plant themselves naturally on both ends. So something has jammed that top of that tree into the ground, and it's like, I'd say 6 inches deep. You can't casually grab it and pull that thing out of the ground. It's in there. And nothing else does that. Nothing else has the strength to do that in nature. Just breaking a tree that's 5-6 inches in diameter, just breaking it is huge to begin with, and twisting it, and they don't ever twist it off. For some reason, they go halfway up, they break it, then they twist it, and then they just leave it hanging. Regardless of the species of tree, they do the same thing. And nothing in nature is that uniform that you find on one space that I go to along a stream. I've counted like 250 breaks of aspen saplings, 1.5 inches, 2 inches in diameter, just all broken, not necessarily facing the same direction, but broken at the same height, twisted the same way. It's just nature's not that uniform. And so we see that a lot. We see the arches. We see kind of structures where they'll just take big trees and they'll kind of weave them into each other, trees that have fallen or dead. And I'll come across one of these big structures, and I look at it first to figure out, okay, was this a naturally occurring? Was this due to some big windstorm, that? And most of the time I think no, because the way things are laid down, it's clear that somebody was thinking this through as they found. I think there maybe, and people ask me all the time, what do the tree breaks mean? What do the arches mean? I don't know. I don't speak Sasquatch. We can only try to theorize why they do it, and I'm sure it's not for us. It's meant for other Sasquatch, maybe a different family group or something. It's between them. We're just seeing the evidence of them doing something to communicate non-verbally, and maybe it's a dominance thing. I'm the biggest Sasquatch around, and I can break a bigger tree than you. I don't know, but Um, Sometimes it's almost artistic and almost delicate how they'll weave things together. I mean, actually weave them together, saplings and stuff. It's pretty beautiful, actually.
What do you think they are?
Ah, that's the rub. This is where the Bigfoot community is deeply divided on that very question. I started off 11, 12 years ago believing they were some kind of great ape that we hadn't categorized. I have long since left that opinion just based on my own research, not even based on my research or things that have happened to people that I do research with, people I trust implicitly, have no reason to lie. They, experiences they have had that would tell me this is not an ape. Far from it. I believe they are people. They're a different kind of people than us. The Native Americans call them the forest people or the hairy people, but they would never call them an animal, and they've been around them way longer than we have. And so, every name for Sasquatch and every Native American tribe has its own name for them. The names they give them are never an animal name. Their names are like Big Brother or Big God of the Woods or the names are all things that apply to a people, not to an animal. And so, and there's lots of reasons, lots of scientific reasons why I believe they cannot be an ape. One, we have every ape ever discovered in captivity today, and most of them for the last 100 years at least. And today, there's approximately 9,000 great apes in captivity: chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas, or different species of chimpanzee, and about 9,000 individuals in captivity around the world. And Sasquatch is on every continent, and have been there since long before us. And we've never caught one. We've never captured one. I mean, to our knowledge, the public anyway. And so if they were just a great ape or just a big great ape, we would have had them in captivity for a long time now. But another compelling reason why I think they're not a great ape, one, they have all these paranormal things about them that are not true of apes. And I can talk about that in a minute if you want. But the other thing is, humans cannot breed with a great ape and produce a viable offspring. The two species are very close, but not close enough to create an offspring. There are numerous accounts historically of humans breeding with Sasquatch and having offspring be the result. And they're bizarre looking many times, but they're offspring. So it is possible for human beings, Homo sapiens and Sasquatch, to create an offspring. That can only happen between human species, not between apes and humans. And so, but there's tons of reasons why I am convinced they're not an ape, and their intelligence alone is enough to convince me that they're not an ape. They have their own language that's been studied by linguists, and Scott Nelson, who's a retired Navy cryptolinguist, has actually created the Sasquatch phonetic alphabet. And so it's a language. He says it's absolutely a language. I don't know what the words mean that they're saying, but they're saying words to each other, even to us. Obviously, we don't know what they're saying, so we can't reply. Which brings the problem. If when we say we hear something in the woods and we repeat it back, and we don't even know what was said to us, and we're trying to repeat it back, who knows what we're saying? I mean, it could be something we don't want to say if we knew. what it was that we're saying. So, yeah, I think I don't tend to repeat back to Sasquatch things that I hear from them. I try to make a different sound. I don't know what I'm saying, but I don't want to say what they may have said to me, because it could be, you know, ringing the dinner bell, or, I'm looking for a partner. I don't know. I don't know what they're saying. So I'm not going to try to repeat back. But we do that all the time as researchers. We'll record something and we'll call blast it back out, which is kind of foolish at some point.
So you mentioned the offspring. Can you give me some stories, some cases where there have been interbreeding between the Sasquatch and and humans?
Yeah, there was a case in Russia where a female Sasquatch was captured, and I'm trying to remember the name they gave her. Hope it'll come to me, but um, there were men that bred with her. Don't ask me why. I mean, it's beyond me what men will do sometimes, but there were men that bred with her, and she had multiple offspring who looked like very hairy humans, almost like the what's the scientific term? I can't remember it offhand, for excessive hairiness in humans. And there are people who are completely covered in hair because of a gene mutation. And their offspring looked a little bit like that, just very, very hairy people. And they typically were seemed to be somewhat handicapped, to have some kind of a disability. Another case was a woman in China, who said she was raped by a Yeren. That's their term for Sasquatch. And she was short, and she had gave birth to this offspring who ended up being over 7 feet tall. And you can watch videos of him on YouTube, and he's extremely tall, extremely thin, very long arms, very long legs. He never spoke rationally. He never wore clothes. He would wear a loincloth, and he went barefoot. And she said that was the fruit of this rape, basically, by a Yeren. It did create an offspring. It sure looked like a strange child to have been from another human man, because it's just, there's just so much about this guy. And I don't think he lived really long. I think maybe he lived to about 30, if I remember, before he died. But there's stories like that have been told over a century now, in some cases. I think the woman in China, if I remember, I mean, it was after when they had the capacity to film, and I think it was the 40s or 50s that this video was produced of this strange looking adult when they finally took the video.
Do you know if any of the offspring were able to audibly learn language or be able to be educated in any way?
I don't know offhand. I need to research those some more. I've seen pictures of offspring of the Russian Sasquatch, and they were dressed. They were in clothes in the photographs, so they weren't running around like this guy in China, not wearing anything, not speaking. So they looked outwardly like a very hairy human wearing clothes. And but I've heard stories of Sasquatch wearing clothes as well. People who have lived in kind of an habituation situation with them and gave them like a X4 or 5XL t-shirt, and Sasquatch would put it on and wore it till there was only the collar and a piece of material left. I mean, he wore it out literally, but he wore it. And so, that's not unheard of It's very rare, but it's not unheard of that Sasquatch would wear clothes that someone gave them, or I've not heard of them making their own clothing, but they certainly wear our clothing apparently without big problem.
You mentioned something about the paranormal qualities of the Sasquatch. Tell me what you know about that.
Well, I have multiple situations, my own included, where my only daytime Class A sighting was I was fishing at a well-known uh, recreational lake not too far from here. It was early in the morning. It was a place where we've had dozens of accounts told to us of people who see a Sasquatch or hear a Sasquatch or whatever out there. I was fishing early in the morning, and I fly fish, and I just cast my fly, and I looked up above me, and this particular lake has a big giant rock mountain at one end that we call the castle, and some of the rocks kind of come around to one side, and there's this big rock outcropping. And I looked up and I saw something standing up there at 6:30 in the morning, very tall, uniform in color. And I've been up to that spot, and I know how hard it is to get up there. I mean, it was literally crawling on our hands and knees up this slope. It was so steep. So I thought, I, I can't imagine anyone camping up there. And, in the couple of seconds I looked at it, I became convinced it was a Sasquatch. Well, right at that moment, as fate would have it, a fish grabbed my fly, and stupidly, instead of watching the Sasquatch, I turned my attention, looked at the fly, and looked back. 2 seconds, three max, and it was gone. And it wasn't running away or ducking down. It was there, and then it was gone. And I have other friends who do research with me who have seen them disappear while they're watching through binoculars, looking at the Sasquatch. It just pixelated and disappeared. And these people have no reason to lie to me or to lie to anyone about it, because it was a very traumatic experience for them. And to make a story like that up, you're just setting yourself up to be ridiculed. And so they don't like to tell the story for that reason, but that's why I know it's a true story. And so I've heard multiple stories of them disappearing while someone is watching. They have certain abilities. Their eyes, whether this is the case all the time or when they choose to do it, their eyes glow in the darks, meaning most wildlife, deer, elk, possums, raccoons, you shine a light in their eyes at night and you're going to get a green reflection back. Sasquatch's eyes glow in the dark by themselves. There's no light source. They're not reflecting anything. I've seen this probably a dozen, 15 times now. And it's always in the pitch black in the woods, and you see a light glowing through the trees. More than likely, unless there's a hiker coming that you didn't know about, most people don't hike into their campsite at night. But I've seen that phenomenon and filmed it fairly close, where I could see the Sasquatch turning its head, eyes bright white, look at me. I could see the pupil. It would look away. It would look back at me. So I know this is real. I know it's a fact. I've heard of multiple stories of them healing people, and in some cases healing them of a terminal illness, and healing them instantaneously and forever. The person never became sick again with that disease that they were healed from. And the person themselves would say, Sasquatch healed me. For different reasons, they believe that. But most of the time it's, you go to bed being sick and you wake up and it's gone. You're healed completely. Could it be something else? Yeah, I suppose so. Could it be divine healing? I suppose so. But in each case, these people who are telling the story would say Bigfoot heal me. And they say it with total conviction. So, Native Americans would tell us that they have shaman powers, that they are shaman. So healing is one part of that. Talking to us into our head or mind speak is another one. I've never experienced it personally. I know many people who have, who would say and would tell you the same story. Yeah, Sasquatch and I communicate regularly. So I just think, but it's nonverbal, it's mental. And so and it's kind of the way people have described it to me is it's thoughts that come into your head out of the blue. You're not thinking about something, and it's just like boom, just this thought will hit you. And very often the thoughts are cause people to want to move away, leave that location, which is probably their goal in doing what they're doing. Zapping or sizzling, we call it, depends on who you talk to, but this ability to influence people from outside to the point where that person becomes overwhelmed with fear or terror with no obvious reason. And often it's one person in a group of maybe 5 or 6 people who are hiking or camping. And that one person suddenly, inexplicably, becomes overwhelmed with terror and fear and says, "We need to leave here right now." And everyone else in the group is like, "Why? We need to leave here right now." And they're so insistent that many times the group will leave. But it's only one person in a group that is affected that way. Everyone else feels nothing. So yeah, so there's a number of things about them that would tell me, yeah, this is no great ape. Cannot be a great ape. Has to be something else. So
Well, that makes sense. What about lights, orbs, or craft? Any of that around them?
we have seen orbs in the woods. I haven't seen them with my naked eye. I've seen them when we've been out in the woods and we just start taking multiple flash photos, and we may be looking over here at some what we believe is eye glow, and someone will behind us will take a picture, and up above, in the same direction that we're looking up in the trees is a very clear blue green concentric circle orb that has to be the size of a basketball or even bigger. And then I'll take a picture, not knowing that the orb was there. I'll take a picture 10 seconds later, the same direction. There's nothing in my picture. So I don't get it. I don't understand it. But yeah, we've seen orbs when we've been out and we felt like Sasquatch were nearby. What did you ask me? Oh, craft.
Crafts,
I've never
lights.
seen lights.
Or craft, either one.
I would call orbs lights. They're just lights that tend to move around, and sometimes we can confuse their glowing eyes with an orb because at a distance it looks like one light, not two eyes. And because they're moving around through the woods, people will see the light from their eyes and call it an orb because they can't see the body. They're just looking at this light that's moving through the woods. But that could easily be the Sasquatch walking over terrain. But yes, we've seen orbs, not that often, but it does happen. Craft, I've never seen any craft. I have multiple friends who would say they were out camping, well-known Bigfoot hotspot, and during the night they wake up and there's a craft somewhere out where they are. If they're on a mountain, sometimes it's down below them in the valley, and the craft will be there for seconds or a minute or two, and then it is gone. But they would say, I'm not, and usually they're not drinking, they're not smoking pot, they're rational, and they see this. I remember Les Stroud, Survivor Man, telling a story on his Survivor Man Bigfoot series. He talks about being on top of a mountain by himself, asleep in a sleeping bag. And at one point, he woke up during the night, and he says when he looked into the valley, he doesn't say this on TV, but he said this at a conference he was at with me. There was a craft in the valley, and it sat there for 10 minutes and then left. And then he remembers that he has a camera right there and never even thought to pull it out. But I've never seen a craft. I can probably be fine with never seeing a craft. I would probably be far more suspicious about what purpose a craft would have, what intentions they might have towards me, than I do about Sasquatch, because I've been around Sasquatch enough to know they're not going to hurt me. I can't say that about a craft, and that would worry me.
Some of the Native American legends talk about Bigfoot going up into the heavens through portals, and they can just come and go. What is your thought on that?
Well, again, there's enough anecdotal evidence that people have of seeing something open, and Bigfoot coming out. We were doing a camp. We do a Bigfoot adventure weekend every summer here, and we keep it to a fairly small group, say 30 people. And so we split up and go out as guides, and we'll take, 4 or 5 people with us. And we've had a couple of guys 2 years ago. We're out. There were 3 of them. One was Native American. The other 2 guys were white. And the Native American guy was playing a drum that he had brought with him. And so one of the guys took his camera out and just started snapping pictures in the dark. He wasn't looking at anything in particular. And he comes up with this. One picture was a bright blue, perfectly circular orb. And then another was the same orb with this geometric shape in the middle of it that could have been something coming out or going in from that orb. I don't know, but it was very intriguing to see that. And it was taken at random. It wasn't like, oh, look, there's a portal, let me take a picture. More often than not, people say they've seen a portal. When they say they've seen a portal, it's an accident. They weren't looking for a portal. Something happened. A lot of people have talked about hearing sounds like a metallic clang of a door or a gate or a trap closing in the woods. And their theory is that's the portal shutting when it's been open. I don't know if that's true, but when they're hearing these noises, there's nothing else out there. There's nothing around, no cars, nothing that could make that metallic sound, but they clearly heard it. So I think there's a correlation between orbs and Sasquatch. I just can't explain that, what that correlation is, what one has to do with the other. I just have seen orbs when I know Sasquatch are in the area. It could be they're totally separate and not having any influence upon one another, or they're related somehow. And I can't answer which one of those is true. So
The geometric shape inside that blue orb on the second or one of the pictures the man took, what was that shape? Do you know?
it was square, but it was like it was yellow. It was a bright blue orb. The square was yellow, and then there was a black something in the midst of that yellow square. Couldn't tell what it was. Couldn't really tell if it came out of that because it was a still shot. Just take a picture. And I'm not even sure they looked at the pictures on his camera or his phone while they were still out there. I think they took a bunch of pictures came back to camp, started going through them. I'm like, oh my God, look at that. There's something in that picture in that orb. And so, I mean, we're just guessing as to what that might mean, a geometric shape in the middle of some kind of a plasmic orb of some kind. But yeah, that was intriguing. Can't explain that one at all.
That is intriguing. There's a lot of talk about these strange boxes that exist around, and you can't see them, but they can pick them up on thermals.
Yeah. Yeah. There's even I've talked to forest rangers who or listened to testimonies who have been out in the woods and come upon a stairway in the middle of the woods that doesn't lead anywhere. It's just sitting there in the middle of the woods. I mean, how does a stairway get into the woods? Who knows? But they said they had seen that more than once, and they had been told by their superiors when they were a young federal agent, don't climb up those stairs. Whatever you do, just stay away from them, mark them so that you know they're there next time. But yeah, there's so many bizarre things that happen out in the woods. I can't even tell you everything.
Did they say how tall the stairway
I mean, it was like a
was?
staircase, like it could be, 10 steps, but it has to have some way that it's supported on itself. So maybe a stairway was pulled out of a house intact, I don't know, and then put in the woods, who knows. But it looks like a stairway someone would have in their house, not a carpeted one, but usually wooden or metal railings and stuff. And it looks like it was just pulled out of a house and just stuck in the woods. And
more than one time they found that.
more than one time they found this. It wasn't like every day, but in one case, I think they said they had found 3 of them over the years, and they were just advised, don't touch it, don't go near it, or you may wish you hadn't.
And what this was in conservation areas? Is that what you're saying?
National forest.
National forest.
Yeah.
Any specific national forest?
I don't remember where they were. In the one case, I believe it was Northern California or Oregon, but there's been more than just that case, and I can't remember where the other ones were. I listened to so many different reports and podcasts and stuff. I remember the stories very well, but I don't remember necessarily what state they were in or which park they were in or whatever.
Well, I find that really interesting. I have not heard that before. You've got a lot of good information. So what else can you tell me about Bigfoot?
They're fascinating. I never get tired of learning new things about them. I'll get to the place where I think I've figured some things out, and then they'll go and do something that totally blows that theory out of the water. And so I've just learned to keep my knowledge with an open hand, and I try not to contradict other people, because I mean, who's really an expert when it comes to this? I'm not. I mean, to call yourself an expert or to claim you're an expert is pretty bold when it comes to an undocumented creature or being that the public has never succeeded in capturing. Military may have, but yeah, I'm trying to think of anything else that I would say about them. I don't think generally that we need to be afraid of them. I think we need to respect them. Just like I'm not normally afraid of mountain lions or bears being, near me, but I'm not particularly afraid of Sasquatch. Early on I was, but I worry more about bears and lions, and I'm usually carrying a gun for that reason, not for Sasquatch. And I hope that they understand that it's not intentional. It's not intended for them. But yeah, they're fascinating. They're complex, highly intelligent. And I never get tired of learning about them, because there's always something else about them that I can learn that I didn't understand. So it's kind of a science that never gets old, really.
still a mystery out there. There's so many things
Very
that we
much.
don't know about them. And a lot of people still don't even believe they exist at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. Well, definitely more people don't than who do. So, um, the stigma of being considered a fool because you believe in Bigfoot has dramatically decreased over the last 10 years due to all the programs about Sasquatch that are well thought of programs on TV, like Expedition Bigfoot for one. But even so, I still get a lot of people come in our store or museum and are total skeptics when they come in and total skeptics when they leave. So for them, they have to see it with their own eyes. They're never going to be convinced by any amount of evidence I could show them. So I don't try. There's no point. My goal is not to convince everyone in the world that Bigfoot exists. My goal is to show them enough evidence that would convince them that that's a possibility. And when people go through our museum, we have 3 plexiglass boxes. They get a token as they go in, and at the end, we ask them to put their token into a box that says, yes, I believe, maybe I believe, no, I don't believe. The yeses is always the most, and then the maybes, and the no's are always the least. And so, but there's always no's for sure in the box.